Welcome, dear friends. Today I will share with you a story of love, heartbreak, and resilience in the face of life's toughest challenges. Enjoy the story. Tiffany drummed her fingers anxiously on the steering wheel of her yellow taxicab, staring out at the bustling New York City streets without really seeing them. Her mind was elsewhere, lost in thought about her marriage. Something wasn't right with Stephen lately. He had become distant, secretive even, always on his phone, angling the screen away from her view. And those supposed late nights at the office, Tiffany was starting to wonder if it was another woman occupying her husband's time. A crackly voice over the radio interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Tiff, you okay? You've been parked there for 15 minutes. It was Natalie, her best friend since childhood, and the dispatcher at the cab company where Tiffany worked. Tiffany sighed and picked up the receiver. "Yeah, sorry, Nat. Just got lost in my head for a minute there. What's up?" "I'm worried about you, girl. Come on, take a break and meet me for coffee at Gio's. I think we need to talk." 20 minutes later, Tiffany slid into the red vinyl booth across from Natalie, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The comforting smell of roasted beans and the low murmur of conversation enveloped them. "Spill it," Natalie demanded. "What's going on with you and Stephen? You've been moping around for weeks now." Tiffany bit her lip. "I don't know, Nat. Something's off with him. He's always on that damn phone, being so sneaky about it. And get this. Yesterday he said he was working late, but Cindy swore she saw him across town, looking mighty preoccupied with something. I'm starting to think—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice her worst fears out loud. Natalie reached across the table and squeezed Tiffany's hand. "Now don't go jumping to conclusions," Natalie said gently. "You know Stephen loves you. Maybe he's planning a surprise for your birthday next month. You know how men are." Tiffany shook her head. "I don't think so. No, something isn't right. I can feel it in my bones. I think I need to do some digging. Find out what he's really up to." Natalie frowned. "Tiff, be careful. Don't do anything rash, okay? Promise me you'll stay calm." Tiffany downed the rest of her coffee and stood up abruptly. "I'm taking the rest of the day off. Cover my shift for me?" She was out the door before Natalie could respond, the bell tinkling behind her. Natalie watched her best friend stride purposefully to her cab, worry gnawing at her gut. She had a bad feeling about this. Tiffany's heart pounded as she unlocked the door to their apartment. She crept inside, holding her breath, straining her ears for any sounds. There! Stephen's voice, low and tense, coming from the bedroom. Tiptoeing down the hall, she pressed herself against the wall outside the door, listening hard. "Don't worry. She doesn't suspect a thing. I'll be there next week like we discussed. It'll be easier to do this away from home." Tiffany clapped a hand over her mouth to muffle her gasp, tears springing to her eyes. So it was true. Stephen was leaving her, running off with another woman. Blindly, she stumbled back to the front door, vision blurred with tears. She had to get out of there before he realized she was home. Nearly tripping in her haste, Tiffany fled the apartment, her heart shattered in a million pieces on the floor. She drove for hours, no destination in mind, just needing to put as much distance between herself and the nightmare her life had become. Eventually, as the sun began to set, she pulled over at a rest stop, finally allowing the sobs to overtake her body. How could he do this to her? After 8 years of marriage, of building a life together. The betrayal cut her to the core, an agonizing pain that stole her breath. But as she wept, a cold, hard resolve began to form. She would not let him see her break. She would carry on with her head held high, throwing herself into work, living her life. Next week, when he left for his little business trip, she would hold her tongue. Let him think he'd gotten away with it, and when he returned, she'd have the divorce papers waiting. Tiffany swiped at her tears, taking deep breaths to steady herself. She was a survivor. She would get through this heartbreak, even if it killed her. With grim determination, she put the car in gear and drove off into the gathering dusk. The tires squealed as Tiffany slammed on the brakes, throwing the car into park and racing through the hospital doors. She had driven like a maniac from LaGuardia after that heart-stopping phone call from Vera, Stephen's sister. Tiff, I need to tell you something. Vera's shaky voice had crackled across the line. It's about Steven. He's not on a business trip. God, I don't even know how to say this. What? What about Steven? Vera, you're scaring me. Cold fear had gripped Tiffany's heart. Steven's sick, Tiff. Real sick. He's at Bellevue, getting treatment. He didn't want to tell you yet, but I couldn't let you go on thinking. Vera's voice had faded into white noise as those two words slammed into Tiffany like a freight train. Steven's sick. Oh, God. Now she raced through the antiseptic maze of hallways, following the signs for the oncology wing, terror and guilt warring in her chest. How could she have doubted him? All those weeks of imagining the worst, and the reality was so much more devastating. Room 541. There it was. Her hands shook as she pushed open the door, bracing herself for what lay inside. Nothing could have prepared her for the sight of her strong, vital husband, looking so pale and small in that hospital bed. He was hooked up to half a dozen tubes and wires, machines softly beeping, a frail shadow of himself. "Steven," she sobbed, staggering to his side, clutching at his hand like a lifeline. His eyes fluttered open, a glassy, medicated blue. "Tiff," he rasped, "guess the secret's out." He tried for a smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. She shook her head helplessly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I thought—" "I know what you thought," he said gently, "and I don't blame you. I'm sorry, too, for all the secrecy. I couldn't bear for you to see me like this. Weak, sick." His voice broke. Tiffany cupped his face in her hands, leaning in close. "Stephen Philip Walker, you listen to me. In sickness and in health, remember? I meant those vows. We're going to fight this together. Every step of the way, I'm right here by your side. You hear me?" He nodded, a single tear sliding down his gaunt cheek. She wiped it away tenderly. For a long moment, they just held each other, clinging to the love that had always been their anchor. Outside the window, the New York City skyline glittered under the summer sun. They had a long, hard road ahead. 2 years of chemo, of sickness and struggle. But Tiffany knew with bone-deep certainty that their love could weather any storm. She would be Steven's rock, his lighthouse in the dark, and someday, if they were very lucky, the sun would shine again. Tiffany closed her eyes, said a silent prayer, and prepared for the fight of their lives. 2 years later— "Happy anniversary, babe." Steven clinked his champagne glass against Tiffany's, the sunset painting their faces in shades of gold. The beach stretched out before them, an endless expanse of sand and sparkling waves. Tiffany leaned against her husband, strong and healthy once more. The Bahamas had been his idea, a chance to celebrate their 10th anniversary and his 3rd year cancer-free. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" she mused, watching the seagulls wheel overhead. "And after everything we've been through." Steven pulled her close, burying his nose in her wind-swept curls. "I couldn't have done it without you, Tiff. You're my hero, you know that?" She laughed, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. "I think this might just go down as your most memorable business trip yet." He grinned, the smile she'd fallen in love with, that could still make her knees go weak. "Maybe we should schedule a 2-year follow-up. You know, just to be safe." "I'll be there," she promised, slipping her arms around his neck. "Through blue skies and hurricanes, I'll always be by your side." And as the setting sun turned the sea to molten gold, Tiffany held her husband close, their hearts beating as one. They had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, their love a beacon to light the way. Come what may, they would face this wild, wonderful life together, always.